My name is Danny Martinez. I'm 34 years old, and I drive a delivery truck in Tampa, Florida. What happened to me last Tuesday night changed everything I thought I knew about kindness, money, and how the world really works. I was coming home from my second job at the warehouse, bone-tired and thinking about how I was going to explain to my 8-year-old daughter Emma why we might have to move again. The eviction notice was sitting on my kitchen counter like a ticking bomb, 3 weeks behind on rent. And my landlord, Mr. Peterson, wasn't the patient type. Being a single dad isn't easy when you're working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over your kid's head. It was around 11:30 p.m. when I turned onto Maple Street, and that's when I saw him. This older guy, maybe in his 60s, wearing an expensive-looking suit that was now torn and muddy. He was sitting on the curb near the abandoned gas station, holding his head in his hands. Something about the way he sat there, completely defeated, reminded me of myself after Emma's mom left us 3 years ago. I pulled over, even though every rational part of my brain told me not to. In this neighborhood, you mind your own business after dark. But the guy looked lost, really lost. When I rolled down my window, he looked up with these tired eyes and said, "I'm sorry to bother you, son." I seemed to have gotten myself into quite a predicament. His voice was cultured, educated. Not what you'd expect from someone sitting alone on a street corner in East Tampa. I asked if he needed help, and he explained that his car had broken down about 5 miles away. His phone was dead, and he'd been walking for hours trying to find somewhere safe to call for assistance. The way he said assistance instead of help told me this guy wasn't from around here. Now, I should mention that helping strangers wasn't exactly in my budget. Gas money was tight, and I had exactly $37 to last until Friday's paycheck. But something about this man's dignity, even in his obvious distress, made me make a decision that would change my life forever. I told him to get in, and I'd drive him to his car. During the 20-minute drive, he introduced himself as William. Just William. He was visiting Tampa on business, he said, and wasn't familiar with the area. His rental car had simply died on him, and when he tried to call his assistant, he discovered his phone battery was completely drained. The way he talked, it was clear this guy wasn't used to being helpless. You could tell he was someone who normally had people solving his problems for him. When we got to his car, a black Mercedes that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years, William insisted on paying me for the gas and my time. He pulled out this thick wallet and tried to hand me a $100 bill. I almost took it. God knows Emma and I could have used it, but something felt wrong about accepting payment for basic human decency. I told him to keep it, that I was glad I could help. The look on his face when I refused that money was something I'll never forget. Surprise, respect, maybe even a little confusion. He asked for my address, said he wanted to send me a proper thank you. I gave him my card from the delivery company, figuring he'd probably forget about the whole thing by morning. Rich people help each other all the time, right? But regular folks like me, we're invisible to them. William shook my hand before I left, and his grip was firm, meaningful. "Danny," he said, "you've reminded me that there are still good people in this world. That means more to me than you could possibly know." Then I watched him get into that Mercedes and drive away into the night. I went home, checked on Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in her little bed, and fell asleep thinking about how I was going to come up with next month's rent. The eviction notice was still there in the morning, still demanding $1,200 that I simply didn't have. I made Emma her breakfast, dropped her off at school, and headed to my delivery route, trying not to think about how I was failing her as a father. That's when everything started to get weird. Around 2 p.m., I was delivering packages to a high-rise office building downtown when I noticed this black SUV parked across the street. Nothing unusual about that, except I swear I'd seen the same vehicle near my apartment that morning. When I came out of the building 30 minutes later, it was gone. But the strange feeling stayed with me all day. During my lunch break, I called the apartment complex office to ask about a payment plan for the rent. That's when Mrs. Rodriguez, the office manager, told me something that made my blood run cold. "Oh, Mr. Martinez," she said, "didn't you know? Your rent has been paid in full for the next 12 months. The payment came through this morning." I nearly dropped the phone. 12 months of rent? That was over $14,000. Who would pay that kind of money, and why? When I pressed Mrs. Rodriguez for details, she just said it came from a legal firm downtown, and all the paperwork was legitimate. Someone had paid my rent for an entire year, anonymously. That evening, after picking up Emma from her after-school program, I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. No postmark, no delivery stamp, just a plain white envelope with my name written in elegant handwriting. Inside was a handwritten note that said, "Thank you for reminding me what kindness looks like. This is just the beginning. A friend." Emma noticed I was acting strange at dinner. "Daddy, you look worried," she said, poking at her mac and cheese. "How do you explain to an 8-year-old that someone had just paid your rent for a year, and you had no idea who or why?" I told her everything was fine, but that night I barely slept. Good things like this didn't happen to people like me. There had to be a catch. The next morning, I was proven right. As I was loading my delivery truck, my supervisor Carlos walked over with a grim expression. "Danny, we need to talk," he said. My heart sank. I'd been working for Tampa Express Delivery for 3 years, and Carlos had always been straight with me. But the look on his face told me this wasn't good news. He led me to his small office behind the warehouse and closed the door. "I got a call yesterday afternoon," Carlos said, not meeting my eyes. "Corporate says we're downsizing, and I have to let you go." "I'm sorry, man. I know you've got Emma to think about." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The one job that gave me steady hours, decent pay, and health insurance for Emma, gone. Just like that. I asked Carlos if this had anything to do with my performance, and he shook his head. "You're one of our best drivers, Danny. This came from way up the chain. Someone specifically requested that you be terminated." Specifically requested. Those words echoed in my head as I cleaned out my locker and walked to my car. Someone had targeted me for termination. But who? And why? The timing seemed too coincidental. First the mysterious rent payment. Now this. It felt like someone was playing games with my life. The black SUV was back, parked at the far end of the parking lot. This time I was sure it was the same one from yesterday. I decided to confront whoever was watching me, but as I started walking toward it, the vehicle pulled away quickly. The windows were too tinted to see inside, but I caught a partial license plate. Something ending in 847. That afternoon, while Emma was at her friend's house, I decided to do some investigating. The legal firm that had paid my rent was called Morrison, Blake and Associates. Their website was professional but vague: corporate law, estate planning, financial services. When I called their office, the receptionist said they couldn't discuss client matters but confirmed they'd handled a transaction on my behalf. I drove to their downtown office, a gleaming glass tower that made me feel underdressed in my delivery uniform. The lobby was all marble and expensive art, the kind of place where people like me weren't welcome. But I was determined to get answers. The security guard directed me to the elevators, and I rode up to the 15th floor. The receptionist was a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that seemed genuine. When I explained who I was, her expression changed slightly. "Oh, Mr. Martinez," she said. "Mr. Morrison has been expecting you. Please, have a seat." That phrase, "has been expecting you," sent chills down my spine. How could he be expecting me when I hadn't even known this place existed until a few hours ago? Within 5 minutes, a tall man in an expensive suit emerged from a corner office. He was probably in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. "Mr. Martinez," he said, extending his hand. "I'm James Morrison. Thank you for coming in. I think we need to have a very important conversation." He led me into his office, which had a view of Tampa Bay that probably cost more per month than I made in a year. The walls were lined with law books and framed photographs of Morrison with various politicians and business leaders. Morrison sat behind his massive desk and steepled his fingers. "I represent a client who has taken a significant interest in your welfare," he said. "The rent payment was just a gesture of goodwill. However, there are certain complications that have arisen." Complications? I didn't like the sound of that. I asked him to be more specific, and Morrison's expression became more serious. "My client's generosity toward you has attracted unwanted attention from some very powerful people. People who believe you have something that belongs to them." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "Look, Mr. Morrison, I drive a delivery truck and live paycheck to paycheck. What could I possibly have that powerful people would want?" Morrison leaned forward. "Information, Mr. Martinez. You spent 30 minutes in a car with my client 3 nights ago. During that conversation, he may have mentioned certain business matters. There are people who would pay handsomely to know what was discussed." The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was terrifying. William, the man I'd helped, wasn't just wealthy. He was someone important enough that our brief conversation had made me a target. I told Morrison that William and I had barely talked about anything personal, certainly nothing about business. "That may be true," Morrison said, "but perception is reality in certain circles. The fact that my client chose to reward your kindness so generously has been interpreted as evidence of a deeper relationship. You've been marked as someone with potential access to sensitive information." Before I could respond, Morrison's phone buzzed. He answered it, and I watched his face grow pale. "I understand," he said quietly. "Yes, he's here now." He hung up and looked at me with what might have been pity. "Mr. Martinez, I'm afraid the situation has just become much more serious. My client's corporate jet was sabotaged this morning. He's currently in intensive care at Tampa General Hospital." The room seemed to spin around me. William was in the hospital because someone thought I had information about his business? This was insane. I was nobody, a single dad trying to keep his head above water. How had helping a stranded motorist turned into this nightmare? Morrison walked me to the window and pointed toward the parking garage across the street. "Do you see that black SUV on the 3rd level?" I looked and saw it. The same vehicle that had been following me. "They've been watching you since yesterday. My advice is to go home, pack a bag, and take your daughter somewhere safe until this situation is resolved." I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you telling me to run? To uproot my daughter's life because I gave someone a ride?" Morrison nodded grimly. "Mr. Martinez, these people play for keeps. They've already cost you your job, and that was just a warning. The next escalation could be much worse." Walking back to my car, I felt like I was in some kind of movie. This couldn't be real life. Real life was struggling to pay bills and helping with homework and falling asleep on the couch after double shifts. Real life wasn't corporate conspiracies and hospital visits and needing to flee town because of a random act of kindness. I picked up Emma from her friend's house and tried to act normal during dinner. She chattered about her day at school, completely oblivious to the fact that our world was falling apart around us. After she went to bed, I sat at my kitchen table staring at Morrison's business card and trying to figure out what to do next. That's when I heard the sound that would haunt my dreams for months afterward. A low, mechanical humming that seemed to be coming from directly above my apartment building. I looked out the window and couldn't believe what I saw. A helicopter was hovering over the parking lot, its searchlight scanning the cars below. As I watched, the helicopter moved away and disappeared into the night. But the message was clear. They knew where I lived, and they weren't trying to hide their surveillance anymore. I double-checked the locks on my door and windows, but I knew that if they really wanted to get in, my cheap apartment security wouldn't stop them. The next morning brought a knock on my door that made my heart skip. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman in a business suit holding a briefcase. She looked professional, unthreatening, but after everything that had happened, I wasn't taking any chances. I called through the door and asked what she wanted. "Mr. Martinez, my name is Sarah Chun. I'm an investigative journalist with the Tampa Tribune. I'd like to talk to you about William Ashford. The name hit me like a lightning bolt. William Ashford. Finally, I had a full name for the man whose simple car trouble had turned my life upside down. I opened the door but kept the chain latched. Sarah Chun was Asian American, probably in her early 30s, with intelligent eyes and the kind of intensity that comes from chasing big stories. Mr. Ashford is one of the wealthiest men in America, she said. He owns Ashford Industries, which has contracts with the Department of Defense worth billions of dollars. Defense contracts. Military weapons. Suddenly the surveillance and intimidation tactics made more sense. This wasn't just about corporate espionage. This was about national security. I let Sarah into my apartment, and she spread several photographs across my coffee table. These were taken outside Morrison, Blake and Associates yesterday, she said. The photos showed me entering and leaving the law office, but they also showed something else that made my blood run cold. In the background of one photo, partially hidden behind a parked car, was a man pointing a long-lens camera directly at me. Who's following me? I asked. Sarah's expression was grim. We're not entirely sure, but we have reason to believe it's a private military contractor called Blackwater Solutions. They specialize in corporate security and information gathering. Private military contractors. The word sounded like something out of a spy movie, not something that should be part of a delivery driver's vocabulary. Sarah continued, Mr. Ashford has been receiving death threats for months. Someone has been trying to sabotage his defense contracts, and when he was seen getting into your truck 3 nights ago, they assumed you were part of his security detail. I laughed bitterly. Security detail? Lady, I make $11 an hour and drive a 15-year-old Honda. Do I look like security detail material? But even as I said it, I realized how this must have looked to outside observers. A late-night meeting, an expensive car, a mysterious passenger. It could easily be misinterpreted. Sarah leaned forward. The problem is, Mr. Martinez, that perception has already become reality in certain circles. Blackwater Solutions has been hired to identify and neutralize any threats to their clients' business interests. Right now, you're classified as a potential threat. Before I could process this information fully, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Tampa General Hospital. My hands shook as I answered. Mr. Martinez? This is Dr. Patricia Williams from Tampa General. I'm calling about Mr. William Ashford. He's awake and asking to speak with you. Sarah watched my face as I took down the information. Room 412, ICU ward. Visiting hours until 8 p.m. When I hung up, she immediately started packing up her photographs. I'm coming with you, she said. It wasn't a request. Why would you want to get involved in this? I asked. Sarah's smile was sharp and determined. Because this story could expose a network of corporate corruption that goes all the way to Washington. And because if I'm right about what's happening here, you're going to need all the allies you can get. The drive to Tampa General was tense. Sarah followed me in her own car, a blue Toyota that looked as unremarkable as my Honda. I kept checking my rearview mirror for black SUVs, but the afternoon traffic seemed normal. Maybe they were backing off now that their target was in the hospital. Tampa General's ICU was a maze of sterile corridors and hushed conversations. When we finally found room 412, I was shocked by what I saw. William Ashford, the dignified gentleman I'd helped 3 nights ago, was barely recognizable. His face was bruised and swollen, and machines monitored his vital signs with quiet electronic beeps. But his eyes were alert and focused when he saw me. Danny, he said, his voice hoarse but strong. I'm so sorry about what's happened to you. I never intended for my problems to become yours. I pulled a chair close to his bed while Sarah stayed by the door, watching the hallway. Mr. Ashford, I still don't understand what this is all about. Why would anyone care that I gave you a ride? His laugh was bitter. Because, my young friend, I'm worth approximately $8.7 billion, and there are people who would kill to get their hands on what I know about certain government contracts. He paused, wincing as he shifted position. When I got into your truck that night, I was running for my life. Running for his life. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. I'd thought I was helping a stranded motorist, but I'd actually been harboring a fugitive billionaire. The men who sabotaged my plane, William continued, they're working for a consortium of defense contractors who want to take over my government contracts. Contracts worth over $40 billion. $40 billion. I tried to wrap my head around that number and failed completely. Sarah moved closer, pulling out a small recording device. Mr. Ashford, are you willing to go on the record about this conspiracy? William looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. At this point, publicity might be my only protection. And Danny's. He turned back to me. I'm afraid that by helping me, you've become a target. These people will assume I shared sensitive information with you during our drive. I felt sick to my stomach. But I don't know anything. We barely talked about your business at all. William's expression was sad but unsurprised. That won't matter to them. The fact that I chose to reward your kindness so generously will be seen as evidence of a deeper relationship. Sarah leaned forward with her recorder. Mr. Ashford, can you tell us specifically who's behind this conspiracy? William was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his options. Finally, he spoke. The man orchestrating this is named Richard Hawthorne. He's the CEO of Hawthorne Defense Systems, and he's been systematically targeting smaller defense contractors to force them out of business. My company was next on his list. Richard Hawthorne. Sarah scribbled the name in her notebook like it was pure gold. Hawthorne has connections throughout the Pentagon and Congress, William continued. He's been using a combination of legal pressure, industrial espionage, and when necessary, more direct methods to eliminate his competition. More direct methods. I was starting to understand why William had been so concerned about his safety. The night you found me, he said, I had just discovered that my plane had been sabotaged. Someone had tampered with the hydraulic systems. If I had taken off as scheduled, I would have died in what looked like an accident. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was terrifying. I was caught in the middle of a multi-billion-dollar conspiracy that had already involved attempted murder. Mr. Ashford, I said, what can we do to stop this? His smile was grim but determined. We're going to expose them, Danny. Every illegal contract, every bribe, every threat. Sarah here is going to help us tell the world what Richard Hawthorne has been doing. But before anyone could respond, the lights in the room suddenly went out. Emergency lighting flickered on a moment later, but in that brief darkness, I heard footsteps running down the hallway. Sarah grabbed my arm. We need to leave. Now. William tried to sit up despite his injuries. The briefcase, he said urgently. In my closet. Take it and run. I found a black leather briefcase hidden behind his clothes. It was heavier than I expected and secured with a digital lock. The combination is Emma's birthday, William said, and I stared at him in shock. How could he possibly know my daughter's birthday? I had you investigated after our meeting, Danny. I needed to know if I could trust you. Sarah was already at the door, peering into the hallway. Security guards are evacuating this floor, she said. This isn't a coincidence. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the stairwell, and I could hear men shouting orders. Go, William said. Take the service elevator to the basement parking garage. My car is in space B47, a black Mercedes. The keys are in the briefcase. He pressed a hospital bracelet into my hand. This will get you past the security sensors. I wanted to stay and help him, but William shook his head. I'll be safer here surrounded by hospital security than anywhere else. But you and Sarah need to disappear until we can figure out our next move. We slipped out of the room just as the main elevators arrived with a group of men in dark suits. They moved with military precision, clearly not hospital personnel. Sarah and I made it to the service elevator just as we heard voices coming from William's room. The basement parking garage was dimly lit and mostly empty. William's Mercedes was exactly where he'd said it would be, and the briefcase keys worked perfectly. As we drove toward the exit, I saw 3 black SUVs pulling into the garage behind us. "Drive normally," Sarah said, but I could hear the tension in her voice. "Don't let them know we're running." We pulled out of the parking garage and merged into evening traffic, and I felt a small surge of relief. Maybe we had escaped. That feeling lasted exactly 3 blocks. In my rearview mirror, I saw one of the black SUVs following us at a discreet distance. "They're behind us," I told Sarah, and she twisted around to look. "I see them. Turn right at the next light, then left into that shopping center." I followed her directions, and we pulled into a crowded Walmart parking lot. The SUV drove past without stopping, but I wasn't fooled. They knew we were here. Sarah pulled out her phone. "I'm calling my editor. We need to get this story published as soon as possible. It might be our only protection." While she made her call, I examined William's briefcase more carefully. Besides the car keys, it contained several USB drives, a thick stack of documents, and what looked like financial records. One document caught my attention immediately. It was a contract between Hawthorne Defense Systems and a company I'd never heard of, Morrison Consulting Group. The same Morrison from the law firm that had paid my rent. The pieces were starting to fit together in a way that made me feel sick. "Sarah," I said, showing her the document, "I think the lawyer who paid my rent is working for the people trying to kill William." Her face went pale as she read the contract details. "This is a payment authorization for information acquisition and target neutralization," she said. "Danny, they've been planning this for weeks." My phone rang, and Morrison's name appeared on the caller ID. Against Sarah's whispered protests, I answered it. "Mr. Martinez." Morrison's voice was calm and professional. "I understand you've been to visit Mr. Ashford. I think we need to have another conversation." "I think I've heard enough from you," I said. But Morrison continued as if I hadn't spoken. "You're currently driving Mr. Ashford's Mercedes. License plate number HTK 847. The briefcase you removed from his hospital room contains documents that don't belong to you." My blood ran cold. How could he know those details so quickly? "Mr. Martinez, I'm going to make you a very generous offer. Return the briefcase and its contents, and you and your daughter will be compensated handsomely for your inconvenience. Refuse, and things will become very unpleasant very quickly." I looked at Sarah, who was frantically taking notes. "What kind of compensation are we talking about?" I asked, trying to buy time while she contacted her editor. Morrison's voice became warmer, almost fatherly. $1 million, Mr. Martinez. Tax-free, deposited in any account you specify. Enough to ensure Emma's college education and a comfortable life for both of you. All you have to do is walk away from this situation. $1 million. I'd never even imagined having that kind of money. Emma could go to any college she wanted. We could buy a house, travel, never worry about bills again. All I had to do was betray a man who had shown me nothing but kindness. "I need time to think about it," I said. Morrison chuckled. "Of course. But don't take too long, Mr. Martinez. Offers like this have expiration dates." The line went dead, and I sat staring at my phone. Sarah finished her call and turned to me. "My editor is fast-tracking this story. If we can get the documents to him tonight, the Tribune will run an exposé tomorrow morning." She looked at my expression and frowned. "What's wrong?" I told her about Morrison's offer, and her reaction was immediate and intense. "Danny, you cannot trust these people. They'll pay you the money and then eliminate you anyway. You're a loose end that they can't afford to leave untied." But the thought of that money kept echoing in my mind. Emma's future secured. All our financial problems solved with a single decision. Was I being selfish by refusing? Was I putting my daughter at risk for the sake of a man I barely knew? My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It was a photo of Emma at her after-school program, playing on the playground with her friends. The message below the photo was simple. Beautiful daughter. Such a shame if something happened to her. All thoughts of the money vanished instantly. These people had just threatened my little girl. I showed the message to Sarah, whose face hardened with anger. Now we know what kind of people we're dealing with, she said. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It was a photo of Emma at her after-school program, playing on the playground with her friends. The message below the photo was simple. Beautiful daughter. Such a shame if something happened to her. All thoughts of the money vanished instantly. These people had just threatened my little girl. I showed the message to Sarah, whose face hardened with anger. Now we know what kind of people we're dealing with, she said. I started the Mercedes and pulled out of the parking lot. Where are we going? Sarah asked. To get my daughter, I replied. And then we're going to destroy these bastards. A mistake. I could hear the satisfaction in William's voice. When his people broke into the hospital, they were caught on multiple security cameras. The FBI has video evidence of them attempting to intimidate a federal witness. Hawthorne's involvement in this conspiracy is no longer deniable. Sarah grabbed my arm excitedly as she overheard the conversation. Mr. Ashford, she said. This is Sarah Chun from the Tribune. Our story goes live in 6 hours. Is there anything else you want the public to know? Yes. William's voice was clear and strong. I want people to know that sometimes ordinary heroes emerge from the most unexpected places. Danny Martinez risked everything to help a stranger. And in doing so, he may have saved dozens of lives and billions of taxpayer dollars. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Hero. I'd never thought of myself that way. I was just a delivery driver who'd made a choice to be kind to someone in need. But maybe that's what heroism really was, ordinary people making extraordinary choices when it mattered most. The next morning, Sarah's story dominated the front page of the Tampa Tribune. Defense contractor conspiracy exposed. Billions in fraud, attempted murder, and corporate corruption. The article detailed everything we'd discovered, with supporting documents and FBI confirmation of the ongoing investigation. By noon, the story had been